Welcome back to Inhibition. Today's topic, voter suppression. Is it a tool of the right, or is this just a myth of the left? We're going to break down the data, we're going to look at the information, and look at the facts, and see if the facts back up the claims of the left. It's time we talk about it. All right, thank you so much for joining me again today. Before we jump into the topic, if you're new here, we post new videos on political topics from a conservative point of view every Tuesday and Saturday. So if you're interested, hit that subscribe button and go ahead and hit that notification bell to make sure that you're getting the notifications for every time we post a video. You don't want to miss it. We break down all of these in detail. Now let's jump into the topic today, voter suppression. There is a big claim against people saying that the Republicans and conservatives are suppressing votes, specifically of minorities such as the African American community, but in general just suppressing votes because that's the only way Republicans can win. That's the claim that is made from the left. So is this really something the right is doing? Is this really something conservatives are doing? Or is this just a myth being promoted by the left that is based on lies and misinformation? We're going to break down the details and talk about this. But first I want to point out, you can see people are indeed claiming this. Hakeem Jeffries said voter suppression is their only strategy. We must and we will respond accordingly. Now, if you don't know who Hakeem Jeffries is actually a congressman in Brooklyn and Queens and is chair of the House Democrats. And so he is speaking here of Republicans saying that their only strategy is voter suppression. Then you have Bernie Sanders. In my view, there is no compromise when it comes to protecting the right to vote. We must stop the onslaught of voter suppression and make it easier, not harder, to vote in this country. Maxine Waters, the best way to celebrate Juneteenth is to get focused, get educated, and realize we are in a fight to protect our right to vote. 14 states are already trying to advance voter suppression laws, and that number will only grow. Let's celebrate, but let's act. In the filibuster. Then you have the Pennsylvania House Democrats saying, reminder, voter ID is voter suppression. It's 2021 and Republicans still don't get it. Then you have Alex Padilla of California says it is not alarmist to talk about the voter suppression bills we're seeing across the country in terms of an existential threat to our democracy. The fact that in 2021 voting rights are even on the table for debate demonstrates the precarity of our current political situation. Again, all of these people, including prominent, well-known people, are claiming that there is a mass attempt at voter suppression. Including Maxine Waters talking about the 14 states who've introduced laws, and they're trying to say that the laws are suppressing votes. Voter ID, for example, according to the Pennsylvania House Democrats, is voter suppression. MSNBC wrote this: it is not incidental that the same states that are introducing these anti-critical race theory, anti-1619 Project laws are also introducing voter suppression laws. Nicole Hannah-Jones says, and MSNBC quotes her and tweets it. Now here's the thing. MSNBC is quoting this, trying to link voter suppression, which is what they're calling these new voter ID laws and these new voter integrity laws. They're calling voter suppression laws, and they're saying that these laws are somehow connected to racism because these people are against critical race theory and anti-1619 Project. I have a video coming out in the near future on critical race theory, so I highly encourage you watch that video when it comes out. Again, hit that notification bell. Make sure you get notifications for when it's posted. But here we see that they're trying to link voter suppression, or what they're labeling voter suppression, and racism. And you can see here MSNBC's pushing it. Now we're going to take a look at the laws, and we're going to specifically look at some specific laws to see, are they indeed targeting black minority voters, and are they really suppressing the vote? Now, there's 14 different states who've introduced new legislation. I can't go through all 14 different states. I won't have time in a single video to do that. But I am going to focus in on Georgia. Georgia has been a state that's been in the focus of the media kind of right after the 2020 elections. Georgia was obviously dealing with voting issues and audits and things going on. And so they were in the news. And then early 2021, they passed new voter laws that expanded their voting security and different things. And they were very much blasted for being voter suppression. They were kind of the first wave of these 14 states. So we're going to talk about the Georgia laws, and we're going to break that down in this video. So stay tuned with me through the video. But I want to point out a video. I want you to hear this video of this representative who's speaking, who's talking about these new voter laws.
You have the same people who have been stoking the fire that we're seeing in our democratic process, who now want to come and act like they're the firefighters. If there is a lack of trust in our voting, it is because of you and the lies that you told about the election. This is 150 pages of garbage. And what it is nothing more than artisanal voter suppression. You put in a bunch of the same ingredients of more voter ID, of limiting access for people at the drop boxes, of making it more difficult for people to use the mail-in ballot. It also continues the lie by creating bureau, by creating new audits, by spending millions of dollars to make people have faith in a process that you spent millions of dollars eroding that very faith. What is happening here is slow-moving voter suppression.
So he claims that this is slow-moving voter suppression, that voter ID laws, drop boxes, that there's all kinds of things, and it's just voter suppression. And he's claiming that conservatives are trying to fix faith in the elections, but he's stating that they're having to do that because they tore down faith in the elections, which is absolutely laughable. First of all, the claims that Republicans have been engaging in voter suppression came before the 2020 election. People were saying that back in the 2018 election. They said it in 2016 election. They said it back in 2012, 2008. They've said it repeatedly for decades. Okay, this is not something new. That's number one. Number two, to say that it's Republicans who eroded the faith in the election process after Democrats spent 4 years, starting in 2016, saying that our election was hacked by another nation and saying that the president had colluded with that foreign nation. Democrats spent 4 years eroding the faith in this election. And then when their person wins and people have doubts about the election, all of a sudden the election is the most secure thing in the world and there's no problems, and we shouldn't even think about voter security because there were no problems. Not to, completely ignoring the fact that for the past 4 years, they claimed the election was stolen. They claimed the election was rigged. They claimed the election was terrible. They are the ones who eroded the faith in the election process. And all of a sudden, when their guy wins, all that goes out the window. It is laughable. But we want to back up. We're going to focus in on Georgia. And we're going to talk about specifically, before the 2020 election, voter suppression arguments in Georgia specifically really gained new legs in 2018. And we're going to kind of look at this. So this is Stacey Abrams. And Stacey Abrams ran for governor of Georgia back in 2018. Now, the accusation of voter suppression is not new. It's been around for generations, like I said. And it specifically was actually a thing in our nation. We did have voter suppression for a long time in this country, suppressing votes of minorities, suppressing votes of women. It's true that existed in our history, and it's very important that we acknowledge that. But that is not the same as saying in modern history there's voter suppression taking place, and we need to look at that. The accusation of voter suppression actually gained new legs in the 2018 midterm elections, and we're really stoked by Stacey Abrams in Georgia. So let's rewind to 2018. Let's talk about what happened. In Georgia, there was a governor race between Brian Kemp. This was the Georgia Secretary of State, and he was the Republican, and Stacey Abrams, who was a former Georgia State Representative, and she was the Democrat. And Kemp and Abrams were basically running against each other, and in 2018, Kemp won with 50.2% of the vote. Brian Kemp is currently the governor in Georgia. Kemp won with 50.2% of the vote. Stacey Abrams lost. And the problem is, when that happened, all of a sudden, people started saying, well, Stacey Abrams lost the election, but it was because it was stolen from her because Brian Kemp engaged in voter suppression. So the media started claiming that this was voter suppression. The Georgia governor's race has brought voter suppression into full view. This is from The Atlantic, and this was again in 2018. America is undergoing the kind of slow erosion of democracy that Voting Rights Act was intended to fight. Again, talking about voter suppression. The Guardian says textbook voter suppression. Georgia's bitter election, a battle years in the making. Stacey Abrams and Brian Kemp are locked in a dispute amid allegations of voter fraud, something that has plagued Georgia in its history. Vox says voter suppression really may have made the difference for Republicans in Georgia. Then you've got this headline: Georgia election fight shows that black voter suppression, a Southern tradition, still flourishes. Again, they are claiming voter suppression, and specifically voter suppression of the black vote. But what we want to look at is see if that's actually true. What tactics were behind these accusations? What were they saying behind these accusations? So here's the things that they claimed were voter suppression. There were a few other things, but these were the main ones. So first, they claimed Brian Kemp, as Georgia's Secretary of State, purged names from the voter rolls. He got rid of people off the voter rolls who were registered to vote, took them off the voter rolls so they could no longer vote. So if they showed up to the polls thinking they were still registered to vote, and they could not vote, therefore it's voter suppression. 53,000 voters have been placed in a pending voter file, and in some Georgia counties there were not enough electronic voting machines and local precincts were overwhelmed due to the shortages. These three things they say Brian Kemp did to suppress the vote. Well, we're going to break down each one of these three things and see if those things are true. So let's start with the voter roll purge. Kemp, as Secretary of State, removed around 1.5 million names from the voter registration rolls in Georgia. And in 2017, the year before the midterm elections, where he was running for governor, he removed just over 500,000 names, with 107,000 of them being a result of being inactive in elections for the previous 7 years. Democrats claim Kemp was removing people from the rolls to keep them from voting, and they would be unaware if they showed up at the polls to vote and couldn't. Therefore, Kemp was suppressing the votes. That's the claim. But here's the details they didn't mention, and here's the important part. First of all, Kemp is not the only person to purge the voter registration rolls. Secretary of States in Georgia had maintained the rolls long before Kemp and purged names as well, and the majority are for things like deaths, address changes, etc. And on top of that, this doesn't just happen in Georgia, this happens across the country. Voter registration rolls are purged in Democrat states with Democrat governors. It happens all over the country. It's part of the Secretary of State's job to make sure that the voter rolls are accurate and correct. So this isn't some special thing to Kemp where he was trying to suppress the votes. Now, the people being removed for not voting, that 107,000 people, they were not removed because Kemp was simply following the law. And I've got the Georgia codes listed there on the screen, so you're welcome to go look them up. I highly encourage you, take these codes, go look them up, and read the actual law. But basically, it says if there has been no contact with a voter in the previous 3 years, then the person is moved from the main voter registration roll to an inactive roll. where they will remain and they're still able to vote on that inactive roll. Relatively easy if they haven't moved or changed address. But if after 2 November general elections you don't vote once you're on that inactive roll, then you're purged from the rolls altogether, and you would have to re-register and start the whole process over if you wanted to vote. But this is something that's in the law. It's in those Georgia statutes. Kemp wasn't doing something that was some brand new thing. He was just trying to get rid of names. He was following the law that explicitly says this is what is supposed to happen. Now here's the kicker. That law was signed into law by Democrats. It was a Democrat law. It was House Bill 889 in 1997, and Democrats were in power and controlled the governor's office as well as both chambers of the legislature. The Georgia Senate, the Georgia House were both controlled by Democrats, and the governor was a Democrat. This law was written, passed by Democrats, and it was signed into law by Democrat Governor Zell Miller and took effect on January 1st, 1998. This law about purging the voter rolls, if they haven't voted, that is something that is a requirement in law because Democrats put it into law. Again, you want to talk about this law being voter suppression, okay, you can make that claim, but it was the Democrats who did that. Kemp was just following the law. They also argued that Kemp had done the biggest purge in Georgia history in 2017, leading up to the election, and had abused the power. They claimed this was voter suppression, however, they failed to mention why that number was so high. So in essence, what they're saying is, the law says to purge it, we get it. But this in 2017, that was the biggest purge in the history of the state. And therefore, it's voter suppression. Kemp was doing something wrong. He was abusing the power. The problem is they don't give you the details. The number was so high because a group affiliated with Stacey Abrams had sued in 2015 to prevent the 2014 and 2015 voter rolls from being cleaned. When they lost that lawsuit in 2017, the law required Kemp to clean the rolls from 2014 to 2017. In other words, Kemp couldn't remove the names in 2014, 2015, or 2016 because there was a lawsuit pending, waiting and trying to stop him from removing the names. They lost that lawsuit because, of course, Kemp is just following the law, but they didn't lose the lawsuit until 2017. So when they finally lost it, and Kemp now had, the litigation was over, and Kemp had the right to go in and purge these voter rolls like he was supposed to, he had to go back to 2014, and he had to do 2014, 2015, 2016, and 2017. So it was such a large number, and the reason it was so historic is because it was 4 years in one. This is normally done once every single year. But because he couldn't do it for the 3 years previous, then he had to do 4 total years in 2017, which made the number astronomically high compared to normal. So it wasn't just Kemp abusing his power. He was literally following the law exactly the way it was written, and it was just a high number because Stacey Abrams and groups affiliated with her had sued to keep him from doing it for the past couple of years. So that's not voter suppression. There was no voter suppression here, and to date, no one has shown any evidence that the people purged from those rolls tried to vote or wanted to vote and couldn't in any significant numbers. May have been a few people here and there, but in general, no significant numbers. It was not voter suppression. What about the pending voter file? Let's talk about that. Kemp placed 53,000 voters in a pending voter file. And this was an issue where voters were held up from voting based on their registration for a few different issues. So you put them, hey, you've registered, we got this registration. However, for whatever reason, we need to put you in a pending voter file while we try to work out these issues. Well, first of all, this was kind of promoted by the media. The Associated Press actually ran a story about Marsha Appling Nunes. Marsha had registered to vote and then had her registration held up, and the AP said it was perhaps because of the hyphen in her name, trying to make it sound like it was some just artificial, stupid reason that was made up to hold her registration up. When in reality, she had actually been held up because she had already registered to vote. So she had filed a second voter registration application when her first application had already been processed. She was already registered to vote. So there was a problem, and it appeared, potentially fraudulent. They're trying to figure out, why are you filing this application when you've already registered to vote? So she was moved to the pending voter file. So again, this was not voter suppression. Kemp actually could show, and he did show, that 75% of the people on the list had the wrong social security numbers on their registration forms, and 23% were voters whom Abrams' own New Georgia project had registered using incomplete and wrong information. So they were held up not for artificial reasons. They had the wrong social security number. That's a big deal. If your social security number is wrong, how do I know you're an actual American citizen? How do I know that you are who you're claiming to be and not committing fraud? We have to look at those things, which is why they were put in a pending voter file. So no, this was not voter suppression at all. Since 2014, 11,024 voters have been listed as pending in Georgia while the state has tried to find them. They've never shown up to vote, and they have not been found. The Georgia Secretary of State disclosed the information, and local media reported it. National media outlets failed to report the facts. So the vast majority of voters on this pending Georgia file, they've been the state has tried to locate them to either correct their social or to fix, whatever issue was with their voter registration. And the state can't find them. That's why they're on this pending file instead of being resolved. But they've never shown up to vote. So this isn't voter suppression. They never even showed up to vote. So no, this was not voter suppression. What about the electronic voting machines? The electronic voting machines. The accusation was that Republicans had removed electronic voting machines to make it harder to vote and cause long delays that would cause people not to wait and just to leave. And so there was a shortage of electronic voting machines in 2018 in Georgia for that midterm election. And so the claim was, shortage of electronic voting machines. They removed some purposely to cause the delays. The problem is, in reality, Democrats had actually filed a lawsuit about the voting machines, leading a federal judge to impound many of them, reducing the supply for Election Day. The reason that the voting machines weren't there is because Democrats had filed a lawsuit about those voting machines, which led a federal judge to impound them. Again, isn't it interesting that in 2020, when conservatives or Republicans talked about voting machines, they were promoting the big lie and they were eroding faith in our elections. But in 2018 and a little bit before, when Democrats had issues with the voting machines, filed a lawsuit, not a problem at all. And then when the shortage of machines caused problems, they tried to blame Republicans for suppressing the vote. It's a complete lie. It was also Democrats who controlled the boards of election in the counties that had problems. The counties that had problems, that had the shortages, the counties that had the issues where there were long delays, they were in counties that were controlled by Democrats, and their board of elections were controlled by Democrats. So to blame it on Republicans when it would be the Democrats who were the ones responsible for the elections in those counties, it is laughable to blame Republicans. Also, Democrats in Randolph County decided to close several precincts before the 2018 election. The precincts were not compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act, and the poor county in which they were located did not have enough money to bring those places into compliance. The Democrats did end up changing their mind and did open the precincts, but they claimed that the plan was an effort at minority voter suppression by Republicans, which again was a lie. It was the Democrats who had decided to close those precincts, and then when they decided to turn around and open them, they said, yeah, we're going to open them. We're not going to let the Republicans suppress the votes. Again, it's nothing more than propaganda. It is a lie. There was no voter suppression there. So, okay, so we talked about the different things they claimed were voter suppression. Well, were the votes actually suppressed in 2018 in Georgia? Did the vote actually drop? Well, no. This is according to the Wall Street Journal. It says data disproves the voter suppression myth. Democrats scapegoat photo ID laws for losses in states where minority turnout rose in 2018. And then this is what it says. It just so happens that 2 weeks ago, the Census Bureau released a report on voter turnout in 2018, which climbed 11 percentage points from the last midterm election in 2014 and surpassed 50% for the first time since 1982. Moreover, the increased turnout was largely driven by the same minority voters that Democrats claim are being disenfranchised. Black turnout grew around 27%, Hispanic turnout increased around 50%. An analysis of the census data published by the Pew Research Center found that all major racial and ethnic groups saw historic jumps in voter turnout last year. So again, this was written in 2019, but what's interesting is this claim that there was suppression of the votes isn't backed up by the data. It was the highest turnout since 1982, and black turnout and Hispanic turnout increased dramatically compared to what it was. So no, the votes were not suppressed in 2018 in Georgia. So what was their tactic? What were they trying to do? Well, this was the tactic they used. Ignore the details and lie. The Democrats would ignore the details and just lie, and the American people will just believe us and not look it up for themselves. They think you're dumb. The Democrats believe that you are dumb. They think that you won't go look up the data and the information that's right there available to you. And the sad reality is many won't. But I challenge you not to be that person. I challenge you, look at facts, look at data, dig deeper. Don't just go by what the media tells you. Don't go with narratives. I don't care what narrative, whether it's right or left narratives. Look up facts and data and evidence every single time. So did these things actually suppress votes? Well, we already talked about no based on that article, but let's dig a little deeper. In 2014, 50% of registered voters participated in the election. In 2018, 61% of registered voters participated. Minority voter participation set new records, and minority voter registration set new records too. Stacey Abrams actually received more votes in Georgia than Hillary Clinton had received 2 years earlier in 2016. Abrams had also registered close to 1 million new voters. Now, the reason Abrams didn't win, Abrams improved Clinton's margin by only 45,000 votes. Only around 100,000 of that 1 million that she got registered actually showed up to the poll. So while she was good at getting new registration, she could not turn out the vote. But that does not mean that there wasn't historic turnout. Black turnout grew around 27%, Hispanic turnout increased about 50%. An analysis of the census data published by the Pew Research Center found that all major racial and ethnic groups saw historic jumps in voter turnout last year. Now, that does not mean that it didn't keep people from continuing to claim voter suppression, but the facts don't back up their claims. Now, it's happening again. That was 2018. We're going to fast forward to 2021, and the claims still keep coming.
We are reporting breaking news right now. Georgia's Republican governor is about to sign what the legislature passed, and it will be one of the nation's most restrictive voting laws in the whole country. What you're looking at here is Governor Brian Kemp here. He's speaking. We're not actually going to take his remarks, although we have the information, but he is explaining why he is about at the precipice of signing this controversial legislation. Now, let me give you some context. This comes as a new crop of activists are pushing to try to stop exactly this type of problem or create economic consequences. Activists like Bishop Reginald Jackson and voting rights groups like Black Voters Matters, who we've had on the program, say that it's time for corporate America to stand up and break with Trumpism over all of this, that the same groups and organizations and corporations that said they weren't for the insurrection can't sit by silently when all of this turns into trying to steal potentially the next election.
The CEO and chairman of Coca-Cola said organizations like ours must stand up and support Black Lives Matter and social justice. Now when they try to pass this racist legislation, we can't get him to say anything.
This new Georgia bill that the governor is signing now has these ID requirements. It has limits on where you can drop ballot boxes. It makes it, quote, a crime to provide even water to voters waiting in lines. That's the very thing the president rebuked today that we showed earlier in our program.
All right, so I want to point out before we break down some specifics here, how much propaganda was in that news clip. I want to point out some key things that's interesting that shows you that was in MSNBC and it's just pure propaganda. For example, he makes the claim that it is the most restrictive voting requirements in the country. Again, we'll look at details of that later to show you that's not the case, but that's just a pure lie. Notice Brian Kemp, they say that they're not going to take his remarks. Now he's making live remarks, but they don't take his remarks. As a matter of fact, I cut this clip, but right after this, they bring on an activist to make their remarks, to talk about their remarks and their opinions, and completely ignore the other side's opinion. That's propaganda. The context, they say the context is activists speaking against these kind of laws, including Black Votes Matter. That's not the context to the reason Georgia passed these laws. Georgia didn't pass these laws because activists are speaking against them and they want to go against the activists. That's nonsense. That's not the context of this law. And also, he includes Black Votes Matter specifically because he's trying to tie this to race when it has nothing to do with race. He talks about stealing the next election being the goal. Stealing the next election. Now, you just stated that us and conservatives and Republicans talking about the 2020 election being stolen was the big lie. And it's terrible. And how dare you talk about the election not being perfectly fine? How dare you say that it was stolen? How dare you say that we can't trust our election process? Yet you're making the claim that they're trying to steal the next election. Propaganda. He labels it racist legislation. They say it's racist in that clip. And then finally, they point to 3 specific issues in the Georgia law: ID requirements, restrictions on drop boxes, and crime. It makes it a crime to hand out water to those in line. Now, we're going to look at all 3 of those points and see if those are indeed true and suppressing the vote. But I just want to point out, I want you to be very careful with media sources because propaganda prevails. And you've got to watch out for it because it will suck you into believing a lie if you're not careful. Focus on looking up facts and validating facts and evidence. So let's talk about voter ID first. First of all, let's clarify something. Georgia already had voter ID laws. This is a new voter ID law. They already had strict voter ID laws, been around since 2005, 2000 to 2008ish. In that time frame, this is not something new. What this law in 2021 did was change the requirement when it comes to voter ID for absentee voting, voting by mail. And so we're going to talk about that. Prior to this 2021 law, all that was required when filing an absentee ballot was a signature. All they had to do was sign the document, and then they would verify the signature. That was all that was required. This law requires additional information to be given besides just your signature. The absentee ballot would include a form of oath of the elector. That form would include a place for the elector to print their name, a signature line, a field for the electors to print the number of their Georgia driver's license or identification card, and a field for the elector's date of birth. So it requires additionally, besides just the signature, of course, the printed name, but it also requires the ID number of either their driver's license or ID card from Georgia, state-issued ID, as well as the date of birth. Now, before I move into the details of this, This is a logical thing. Signatures can be forged. So if you're just matching or verifying signatures, you cannot guarantee, obviously, that that's the person who actually voted. With absentee voting, you can't really 100% know that the person who filled that out was the person claiming to vote. But that being said, you still want to make it as secure as possible, and one way to do that is your driver's license number or your ID number. Hopefully no one besides close family may know that, but you putting it on there would indicate that it's a better form of security to know that it was actually you that voted. Let's look at the actual law, because there's something about the law that's important. This is from legis.ga.gov. This is from the government website of their actual law. And I want you to look at this. We're going to start at line 1235 there at the top. It says, 2 envelopes to be enclosed within the mailing envelope shall contain the form of oath of the elector and the oath for persons assisting electors as provided for in these codes. Then look at this underlined part. A place for the elector to print his or her name, a signature line, a space for the elector to print the number of his or her Georgia driver's license or identification card issued pursuant to Article 5 of Chapter 5 of Title 40, a space for the elector to mark or affirm that he or she does not have a driver's license or identification card issued pursuant to Article 5 of Chapter 5 of Title 40, a space for the elector to print his or her date of birth, and a space for the elector to print the last 4 digits of his or her Social Security number if the elector does not have a Georgia driver's license or state identification card. Notice what it says. It states that we're going to require you to put your ID number on there. However, if you do not have the ID, we will create a space for you to put the last 4 digits of your Social Security number, and you can verify your identity with the last 4 of your social. So for people saying, well, some people can't get voter ID, and some people you have to pay to get an ID, and if you pay to get an ID, some people can't afford that, and all the other reasons they say you can't have a voter or an ID to vote. It says we want your ID. However, if you don't have one, you need to check this box saying you don't have one, and instead give us the last 4 of your social. So for those who can't get the ID, guess what? They still have a way to vote. On top of the fact that the law itself provides the out for those who cannot vote or who do not have an ID, studies have shown that voter ID laws do not actually suppress any votes. The National Bureau of Economic Research did a study, and it says strict ID laws don't stop voters. Evidence from a U.S. nationwide panel from 2008 to 2018. Look at this. U.S. states increasingly require identification to vote, an ostensive attempt to deter fraud that prompts complaints of selective disenfranchisement. Using a difference in difference design on a 1.6 billion observation panel dataset from 2008 to 2018, we find that the laws have no negative effect on registration or turnout, overall or for any group defined by race, gender, age, or party affiliation. These results hold through a large number of specifications, and then it goes on explaining their specifications and how they came to this study. You can look this study up. Again, National Bureau of Economic Research. Now, it's so important to understand the science when you actually do the study shows that voter ID laws are not suppressing any votes. Specifically, it says there was no negative effect on registration or turnout. And that specifies even for a group defined by race. So people who say black people are being suppressed in voting because of voter ID laws, it's nothing but a hoax. It's not true. Now, before you say, well, this is probably some kind of right-leaning, right-wing group that's making this conclusion. Catalyst, this is a company where the data came from, that research, that study was done, came from this company, Catalyst. Who is Catalyst? It tells us at Catalyst you are a partner in a collective, an innovator and a participant of the longest running data trust in progressive politics. Our commitment is to strengthen the progressive community. Catalyst is a progressive company. and they make no attempt to try to hide that. They are a progressive company. They collect data, and the data that they collected is the data that was used by that company that did the research to see that there was no effect on any votes being suppressed by voter ID laws. So they argue voter ID laws are racist. They try to say that it's racism to demand voter ID law. The first strict voter ID laws were passed in 2005 and implemented in 2008, Georgia being one of those states. Regarding presidential elections, voter turnout for the U.S. population has stayed relatively stable since 1980, with a few exceptions. White people traditionally have the highest voter turnout relative to other racial groups, and black people have higher voter turnout than Hispanics and Asians. Black voter turnout was within 1 percentage point of whites in 2008 when states began to enforce strict voter ID laws. 65.2% compared to 66.1%. They were within 1 percentage point when the voter ID laws were implemented. 1 percentage point. And look at this. They actually had black people actually had a higher turnout than white turnout in 2012 with 66.6% compared to 64.1%. In 2016, black voter turnout dropped from that 66 down to 59.6. While that number was lower than white people, which were at 65.3, it's still higher than Asians and Hispanics. There is no indication that drop was a result of voter ID and was likely simply a result of who the candidates were in 2016. Again, the candidates in 2016 were Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. And that those weren't really great options either way from the viewpoint of many people. And so a lot of people stayed home and didn't vote. The real racism that we really need to look at, though, is not from the voter ID laws, but rather from those who claim that voter ID is racist. Let's look at some of these claims.
Do you have an opinion on voter ID laws?
Yeah, they're usually pretty racist and they're bad.
I think voter ID laws are a way to perpetuate racism.
Would you go as far as say those laws are racist?
For sure.
Do you think it suppresses the African American vote?
Definitely.
Tell us how.
Because they're less likely to have state IDs.
These type of people don't live in areas with easy access to DMVs or other places where they can get identification.
You can always get IDs do over the internet. Does that also make it difficult for black people in particular?
Yeah, you have to have access to the internet. You have to be able to pay an internet service provider for certain fees.
Do you think that's harder for black people to go online?
Well, I feel like they don't have the knowledge of how it works.
A lot of people have smartphones, but you might not have data.
For most of the communities, they don't really know what is out there just because they're not aware or they're not informed.
That is so racist, it's mind-blowing. These are white liberals who are claiming that voter ID laws are racist. And what's sad is they think they're defending black people, and they're actually just being racist themselves. According to these ignorant, racist white liberals, and I use ignorant here not as an insult, but as an actual term of ignorance, that they are literally ignorant of certain facts and reality, ignorant of the experience of black people, ignorant of logic. I mean, it's just ignorance. And what they are saying is indeed racist. So according to the ignorant, racist white liberals, black people are less likely to have state IDs because, one, these types of people. What in the world kind of statement is that? These type of people. What type of people? Black people? Why you call them these type of people? That's such a condescending way to phrase that. Black people don't live in areas with easy access to DMVs. They don't have access to the internet and can't pay for the internet. They don't have the knowledge of how the internet works. Don't have data on their smartphones. They are uninformed and unaware of what is out there, including the DMV. What kind of racist, terrible idea is that? Especially the one, they don't know how to use the internet. They're not intelligent enough to know how to use the internet. That's racist. The translation of all this is these racists think all black people are too stupid to know how to use the internet and to know what is available in their cities, and they are all too poor to have to pay for an ID, have the internet, or data on their phone. They think black people are less than them. They believe black people are inferior to them. That is racist. Now we're going to see how black people respond to some of this. This is taking place, these interviews right here of these black people in this video are in East Harlem. East Harlem is one of the most poor cities in America. You want to talk about where there's going to be people who are disenfranchised? It's in East Harlem. In New York, one of the poorest neighborhoods. This would be the place where you would find the disenfranchised black people who apparently voter ID laws hurt. Let's see what they have to say about this.
Do you have ID normally? You carry ID around?
Yes, I have state ID.
Do you carry ID?
Yes, I do.
Do you know any black person who doesn't carry ID?
No. Everyone that I know has an ID. Why would they think we don't have ID?
That's a lie. Why would they say that?
Do you have ID?
Yes.
Because I have my ID and my friends have their ID. So, like, we know what we need to carry around.
Yeah, everybody that I know have ID. Like, that's one of the things you need to walk around with New York with, ID.
Do you know any black adult who does not have ID?
No, I don't.
Is it a weird thing to even say that?
Yes, it is.
What is this, some type of trick candy cameras?
I know, right?
That's the only thing I brought with me.
Those are legit IDs. I heard a lot also that black people can't figure out how to get to the DMV.
Really?
What does that say to you?
I know it's that, on 25th Street.
Do you know where the DMV is around you?
It's on 125th Street and 3rd Avenue, I believe.
You know how to get there?
Yeah.
Would you have a problem getting there if you had to get there?
No.
I know these sound like silly questions. You know how to get to the DMV?
Of course.
You know where it is?
Yes.
You can get there?
Uh-huh.
No problem.
No problem.
Just checking.
Okay.
And I also heard a lot that black people, especially poor black people, have no access to the internet, can't figure out how to use the internet.
That's just stupidity, honestly. Everybody has access to the internet. Even a little kid can figure out how to work the internet.
I had access to the internet for years.
You know how to use it properly, right?
Exactly. I do it at work. So, of course, I know how to use it. My kids know how to use it. They all have iPads, iPods, whatever.
Your phone has data?
Mm-hmm.
You can actually
unlimited.
Unlimited data.
Mm-hmm. I use my phone as a hotspot.
So it's interesting to me that all of a sudden they think that black people don't have these things or can't do these things, as if black people are somehow inferior, when in reality the black people are saying this is stupid. Of course I have ID. Of course I can get to the DMV. Of course I have the internet. Of course I know how to use the internet. Yet these white liberals think that they are somehow better than these black people and the black people must be inferior. It is laughable. And again, this is in East Harlem where poverty is. This is a very poor area. By the way, I have a video on my YouTube channel breaking down socialism, and I point out that in America, the poor in America are absolutely richer than the poor in a socialist country. That the poor in America, even people living in poverty, have cell phones, have internet access, have things that other countries where there are actual true poverty, especially under socialism, they wouldn't even begin to think to have those things. They would be luxury. So I point that out. If you want to check out my video on socialism, it's up in the card right up here at the top of the video. Also, I have it down in the description below. Feel free to check it out and break that down. But look at this. This right here is absolutely ridiculous. It's racism for you to think that voter ID is racist. Besides voter ID, what else do we have? Well, he talked about restrictions on drop boxes. So the claim for these restrictions on drop boxes is that the new Georgia law limits drop boxes to one for every 100,000 registered voters, or the number of advanced voting locations in the county, whichever is less. The New York Times estimated that the law's provisions would give the 4 counties in metropolitan Atlanta 23 drop boxes, while those counties had 94 available in the 2020 election. So they claim, the drop boxes have been, that limited. There was 94 available in 2020. Now there's only 23 going to be available. They're trying to limit drop boxes. Drop boxes are what you go and you take your absentee ballot to put it in. If you don't trust the mail and don't want the mail to deliver your absentee ballot, you can drop to one of the drop boxes, drop your ballot into the drop box, and that is picked up directly by the Election Commission every single night. so it doesn't go through the mail. So if you don't trust the mail, well, great. So drop boxes are a good thing. And this says here, 94 was available in 2020, and now it's going to be 23 in those 4 counties as a result of this new law. But let's talk about what they don't tell you. Prior to 2020, drop boxes were not a requirement, and the law did not actually even speak about them. So this new law requires every county to have at least 1 drop box. It's the exact opposite of trying to get rid of drop boxes, and it will give counties that did not have them before a drop box. In 2020, while certain counties did have drop boxes, and quite a few of them, there were certain counties that had no drop boxes, and this requires them to have at least 1. That is expanding the drop boxes, not decreasing the drop boxes. On top of that, while the requirement to only have 1 per 100,000 registered voters will reduce the number of drop boxes from 2020 in some counties, it increases it from the elections before 2020. The rules were expanded in 2020 due to the pandemic that caused great concern for in-person voting. It was never meant to be a permanent feature to have a whole bunch of drop boxes, and it was simply a response to the pandemic, which is important because some people think that because it's reducing the number of drop boxes from 2020, then it's restricting, but not really. It's actually expanding from what it was before 2020, but 2020 was a special circumstance. With the vaccine, the pandemic's not having the impact on us anymore that it was having in 2020, and therefore, those expanded rules do not apply anymore. The truth is, the law on drop boxes only looks like restrictions when compared to 2020, which was a special circumstance that no longer is applicable to us. When compared to the elections prior to that, this law is an expansion, not a restriction. So you can't compare what's happening in 2021 to what happened in 2020. 2020's election, we were being ravaged by a pandemic across the country, people dying, and there was great concern about in-person voting. That concern has all but been removed with the implementation of the vaccine, and therefore those expanded rules don't apply anymore. Those are specific to a pandemic. So you can't compare it to 2020. You need to compare it to the 2018 election and before, because that's what actually is being expanded upon. And then what about handing out water? And this is a big one. People have freaked out about this, saying, oh, you can't hand out water. So what's the claim? The law makes it a crime to give water to people standing in line to vote. And this causes people not to be able to wait in the long voting lines, causing people to not vote and just go home. Thus, it is voter suppression. But let's look at the truth. Is that actually what's happening? So the law does make it a crime to give gifts to a person voting. The intent is to keep people from soliciting votes in exchange for a gift. And gifts do include food and drink. Now, this concept's a good concept. Electioneering is bad, and this idea of trying to get people to bribe them to vote your way at the last second by giving them something, that is completely wrong and actually violates the integrity of our election. So this idea of not being able to give gifts to people to try to buy votes, that's a good thing. However, there's a caveat to this particular law. It says that the law only applies within 150 feet of the outer edge of any building within which a polling place is established. It also applies within any polling place, and it applies within 25 feet of any voter standing in line to vote at any polling place. So it only applies if you're 150 feet from the building, within 150 feet, or you're in the polling place itself, or within 25 feet of any voter standing in line. So that means that you could set up a table in the parking lot 150 feet from the building and 25 feet from the line and offer free water as people went to get in line. So while you can't walk up to them standing in line, you can still pass out water to the voters and say, here, take a couple of waters because you might be standing in line a while. Take a couple of waters before you go get in line. Here you go. And then they can go get in line. So they're not being cruel and saying you can't have them, offer them any water. That's not the case. It just means you have to be further back and you can't just walk up to them in line to offer it. You need to offer it as they're going to get in line. But it goes further than that. There's actually a provision in the law that allows for making available self-service water from an unattended receptacle to an elector waiting in line to vote. So you can put those self-service waters, which, you know, the jugs of water where you can take a little cup, put it under there and get water. You can put those all around where the line's going to be, and the people can serve themselves, and that's perfectly fine. So again, it's not being cruel and saying we're not going to offer water to people in line. It's simply saying that you can't go up to them and offer them the water in exchange for a vote. That's the law. This is ridiculous. It is nothing more than lies being spread against Georgia and against Republicans to try to paint Republicans as the enemy, and they ignore all of the facts and evidence because they think you're dumb and won't do the research. Do the research. Prove them wrong. The law is not making people wait without water to make them go home. That is simply not what the law is doing. Therefore, it is not voter suppression. This all boils down to lies, ignored details and facts, and half-truths. The claims of voter suppression are simply not true. It is nothing more than lies mixed with a little detail to trick the masses. It's nothing more than propaganda. It is the definition of propaganda. And it's being sold to you to make you hate a certain group of people and make you vote. They're trying to manipulate you into voting for Democrats because they crave power. They want power, and they will lie and manipulate you through propaganda to get that power. Don't believe it. Do the research. Dig into details. Dig into facts. The guy had also said that Georgia laws were the most restrictive in the country, and I had pointed out that that's a lie and propaganda. I want to point out why. New York prohibits providing meat, drink, tobacco, refreshments, and or other provisions with a retail value of more than $1 within 100 feet of the entrance to the polling places. New York, which is a blue state with a blue governor, prohibits providing drink, including water, if the value is more than $1, which a lot of times water is, within 100 feet of the entrance of the polling places. Georgia is just catching up to what New York already had in place. Yet for some reason, no one's claiming New York is suppressing votes. What about Georgia's new law expanding early in-person voting to allow 17 days of early in-person voting? New York, by contrast, only allows 10 days. Many states only allow 10 days. And yet here's Georgia offering a whole week past that, 17 days. What about the fact that Georgia does not require a reason to vote absentee, while New York requires a reason to be given if you want to vote absentee? Sounds like Georgia's not the most restrictive. What about Georgia requiring absentee ballots be submitted 11 days before the election? Rhode Island requires 21 days before the election that all of the absentee ballots are submitted. 10 whole days before that. Isn't that interesting? Supposedly Georgia is all of a sudden the most restrictive in the country. Yet the Democrats who are saying that will not look at the Democrat states that already have very restrictive laws on the books. Lies, hypocrisy, and propaganda. That's what's being sold to you. And last but not least, before we end this video, I want to point out that voter turnout by race and ethnicity here, this chart, breaks down voter turnout. It is not harming black people. We are not suppressing the vote of black people. Look at this. That blue line at the top, that is non-Hispanic white people. That's white people. As you can see, from 1996 all the way up to about 2004, the white vote has that voter turnout was increasing. Everything was good. From 2004 to 2012, it started declining. It's gone back on the upward trend again since 2012. But look at the black vote. That's the red line right under the blue line. Look at what it was in 1996, then 2000, then 2004, 2008, 2012. All the way up, it continued to increase. And it is still on the increase. 2020, this election, we had historic black turnout for voter turnout. And again, that was in the 2020 election. It has not been on the decline. Black vote is not being suppressed. Clearly by the numbers, the black vote is expanding, not being suppressed. So this idea of voter suppression is a lie. And with that, that takes us to the end of the video. Again, voter suppression, is it a tool of the right or a myth of the left? It is 100% a myth of the left. And I would even replace the word myth with lie. It is nothing more than a lie from the left. Voter suppression is not happening. The Republicans and conservatives don't want voter suppression. We want every legal vote to be counted. Period. No ifs, ands, or buts. Every legal vote to be counted. That's what we want. Hope this video was helpful, gave you some information, showed you at least a little bit of information related to voter suppression and how what they claim is voter suppression is nothing more than a lie. If you like this video, hit the like button. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Hit that notification bell. Comment down below. Is there any other examples of lies that they have told about voter suppression that you can think of? Put it down in the bottom in the comments and we'll be more than happy to discuss it. And let's have a discussion. Hope you enjoyed this video. Until next time. Thanks so much for watching. For more videos, click subscribe and hit that notification bell. And if you enjoyed the video, click that like button. See you next time.